highlights from the January 2020 Democratic debate in Iowa. Everything you need to know about the 2020 race as the candidates debate in Des Moines. Candidates: former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr., Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, and Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, the billionaire Tom Steyer. Among the Democrats who did not qualify for the debate are former Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York City and the entrepreneur Andrew Yang. A quick rundown of the candidates' closing statements. Ms. Klobuchar zinged liberals and says she's the candidate in the middle, inside of the extremes of our politics. Mr. Steyer said Mr. Trump had kicked the American people in the face, and that he wanted to be a good teammate to the American people as a political leader. Mr. Buttigieg described himself as the unity candidate who can win both Democrats and Republicans. Mr. Sanders said this is the moment when we have to think big, arguing unambitious plans will not do in 2020. Ms. Warren offered a message of hope and courage as she detailed the challenges facing the nation, and raised the prospect of being the first woman president of the United States. Mr. Biden called for restoring decency at home and American leadership abroad and warned that 8 years of Mr. Trump's presidency would be an absolute disaster. Who is best suited to take on Trump? In the final minutes of the debate, several of the contenders delivered sharpened pitches about how they believe they can defeat Mr. Trump. What Americans want is something different, Ms. Klobuchar said. I am going to be able to stand across from him on that debate stage and say to my friends in Iowa, the Midwest is not flyover country for me. Mr. Buttigieg highlighted his background as a military veteran. I'm ready to take on Donald Trump because when we get to the tough talk, and the chest thumping, he'll have to stand next to an American war veteran and explain how he pretended bone spurs made him ineligible to serve, he said. Ms. Warren, as she often does, invoked her Republican brothers and noted her ability to find common ground with them. They understand that we have an America right now that's working great for those at the top, she said. It's just not working for anyone else. And Mr. Biden referenced his months of clashes with Mr. Trump, who asked the government of Ukraine to investigate Mr. Biden, helping to lead the president's impeachment. I've been the object of his affection now more than anybody else on the stage, he said. I've taken all the hits he can deliver, and I'm getting better in the polls. Buttigieg has pressed on his weak support from black voters. Mr. Buttigieg faced the biggest question dogging his campaign: why doesn't he have more support from black Democrats? Asked the moderator Abby Phillip. The black voters who know me best are supporting me, he replied. It's why I have the most support in South Bend. It's why among elected black officials in my community who have gotten into this race, by far most of them are supporting me. Now, nationally, I'm proud that my campaign is co-chaired by a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And to have support right here in Iowa from some of the most recognizable black elected leaders. Of course, Mr. Buttigieg didn't address his minuscule polling support from black voters in South Carolina, a huge vulnerability that could hurt his campaign if that weakness is not corrected soon. Klobuchar and Sanders quietly disagree on climate change. Ms. Klobuchar said all the candidates' climate plans pretty much the same. Nearly every one of us has a plan that is very similar, she said. That is to get to carbon neutral by 2045 to 2050. Mr. Sanders disagreed, silently mouthing no and shooting his right arm into the air to demand the next speaking time. It's a national crisis, he said, proceeding to heap blame on the fossil fuel industry and demanding radical changes immediately, not 20 or 30 years into the future. If we as a nation do not transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, not by 2050, not 2040, he said. But unless we lead the world right now, not easy stuff, the planet we are leaving our kids will be uninhabitable and unhealthy. Decency is at stake in impeachment trial, Klobuchar said. Ms. Klobuchar, who is set to be a juror in Mr. Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate, said that the nation's decency is at issue. "This is a decency check on our government," she said. "This is a patriotism check. Not only is this trial that, but also this election. And no matter if you agree with everyone on the stage, I say this to Americans, you know this is a decency check on this president." Ms. Klobuchar said that she has a constitutional duty to perform, and warned the Republicans against standing in the way of requested witnesses. "When I look at what the issue is, it's whether or not we'll be able to have witnesses," she said. "We have asked for only for people as witnesses. And if our Republican colleagues won't allow those witnesses, they may as well give the president a crown and a scepter, they may as well make him king." The Democrats target Trump over impeachment. Mr. Biden said he won't remain embittered by Mr. Trump even after the impeachment trial over whether the president committed impeachable offenses in seeking foreign help to investigate Mr. Biden's son. "I have to be in a position I think of the American people," Mr. Biden said. "I can't hold a grudge. I have to be able to not only fight but also heal." Impeachment, almost uniquely among the Democratic candidates, leads to next to zero disagreement among the party's presidential candidates. It's not an issue that voters ask about on the campaign trail and has nothing to do with how the candidates would perform in office, since if any of them are president it would mean Mr. Trump is not. Still, the impeachment trial due to begin next week will be a monster speed bump for the three senators on the debate stage, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Sanders and Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren said she would have no qualms in leaving the campaign trail to sit as a juror in Mr. Trump's trial. "We have an impeachment trial, I will be there because it is my responsibility," she said. The question about free public college turns into a discussion about a wealth tax. The contrast on free college between Mr. Buttigieg and Ms. Warren was about as gentle as can be. Mr. Buttigieg used his response to a question about free college to blast the rich, saying they should pay the way for their children to attend public colleges and universities, while providing free college to everyone else. Ms. Warren, in defending her free college proposal, said a wealth tax would require millionaires to pay millions of dollars in new taxes, and that if they wish to send their children to public universities, that's fine with her. She did not ding Mr. Buttigieg for opposing free college. "What we really need to talk about is the bigger economic picture," she said. "We need to be willing to put a wealth tax in place. To ask the giant corporations that are not paying to pay. Because that is how we build an economy, and those who want to talk about bring down the national debt." Childcare takes center stage. Several of the candidates spoke at length about the exorbitant costs of childcare and the personal toll it takes on Americans. "It makes no sense for childcare to cost 2/3 of somebody's income," Mr. Buttigieg said. "We have to drive it to 7% or below, and zero for the families who are living in poverty." Ms. Warren and Mr. Biden spoke in especially personal terms about child care, the financial responsibility that nearly brought her down. Ms. Warren said, "If I hadn't been saved by my aunt, I was ready to quit my job," she said. "I think about how many women of my generation got knocked off the track and never got back on." Ms. Warren noted that she has proposed the 2-cent wealth tax to provide child care benefits and universal pre-K, and raised concern about exploitation of child care workers, singling out women of color in particular. "We can raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in America," she said. "That is an investment in our babies and their moms and dads. And it's an investment in our teachers and our economy." Mr. Biden, who said he believed that people who are not able to afford any of the infant care to be able to get that care, referenced his experience raising 2 sons after his wife and a baby daughter were killed in a 1972 car crash. "I was a single parent too," he said. "When my wife and daughter were killed, my 2 boys I had to raise, I was a senator, a young senator. The debate that reflects the muddled state of the race halfway through Tuesday's debate. The conflict has been muted as the candidates have shown little inclination to attack each other while they aim to refocus fire against President Trump. Ms. Warren and Mr. Sanders each defused the clashes between them that dominated the last 2 days. Mr. Buttigieg didn't take shots at Ms. Warren or Mr. Sanders about health care, despite the opportunity. And Mr. Biden has once again avoided being attacked by his opponents, despite leading every national poll of the race. It's a reflection of the muddled state of the race. With 4 candidates in a functional dead heat in polls of Iowa and New Hampshire, there is little incentive for any of them to risk being seen in a negative light by going on the attack. The only candidate on stage who appeared eager to throw punches was Ms. Klobuchar, who remains in the high single digits in Iowa polling, leaving her well below the 15% threshold to accrue any delegates in Iowa's February 3 caucuses that are necessary to win the Democratic nomination. Warren portrays Biden and Buttigieg as thinking small. Ms. Warren cast Mr. Biden and Mr. Buttigieg as incrementalists on health care, saying that their proposals are an improvement over where we are now, but are only a small improvement. Mr. Biden and Mr. Buttigieg support adding the public option to the healthcare system, but oppose the sweeping single-payer Medicare for all proposal. It's just not true that the plan I'm proposing is small, Mr. Buttigieg shot back. We have to move past Washington mentality that suggests that the bigness of plans only consists of how many trillions of dollars they put through the Treasury. That the boldness of a plan consists of how many people it can alienate. Ms. Klobuchar also jumped into the frame, accusing Ms. Warren of offering shifting answers in her own healthcare proposal. You acknowledge that Medicare for all, you couldn't get there right away, Ms. Klobuchar said. You got on the bill that said on page 8 that you would kick 149 million Americans off their current health insurance. Then a few months ago you said you'll wait a while to get there, and I think that was some acknowledgement that maybe what we're talking about it is true. Sanders and Warren clash over a disputed remark about a female president. Mr. Sanders emphatically insisted that he did not make the comment that Ms. Warren has attributed to him, that a woman could not be elected president. Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't say it, he said. And I don't want to waste a whole lot of time on this, because this is what Donald Trump and maybe some of the media want. Ms. Warren said she disagreed with Mr. Sanders but sought to defuse the conflict. Bernie is my friend and I'm not here to fight with Bernie, she said. Ms. Warren continued, leaning fully into her electability argument. The only people on this stage who have won every single election that they've been in are the women, Amy and me, she said. And the only person who has beaten an incumbent Republican any time in the past 30 years is me. The clash between Ms. Warren and Mr. Sanders veered, briefly, into unusual territory, meth. The disagreement unfolded after Ms. Warren said that the only person on this stage who has beaten an incumbent Republican any time in the past 30 years is me. Well, just to set the record straight, I defeated an incumbent Republican running for Congress, Mr. Sanders said. When? Ms. Warren asked. Mr. Sanders said that in 1990, he beat the Republican congressman. Ms. Warren pressed him again on the timing. I said, I was the only one who's beaten an incumbent Republican in 30 years, Ms. Warren said. Well, 30 years ago is 1990, as a matter of fact, Mr. Sanders replied. Mr. Biden sought to bridge the divide about whether a woman can win by bemoaning the factionalism that he said could prevent Democrats from defeating President Trump. The real issue is who can't bring the party together and represent all elements of the party, he said. African American, brown, black, women, men, gay, straight. The fact of the matter is, I would argue that, in terms of endorsement around the country, endorsements wherever we go, I have the broadest coalition of anyone running upward in this race. Biden jabs at North Korea, and Sanders joins in Mr. Biden mocked the North Korean regime, which has lashed Mr. Biden with graphic insults, and the former vice president received backup from his rival, Mr. Sanders. I would not meet with, absent preconditions, I would not meet with the, quote, Supreme Leader, who said Joe Biden is a rabid dog. He should be beaten to death with a stick, Mr. Biden said. Other than that, you like him, Mr. Sanders interjected dryly, referencing North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Other than that, I like him, and he got a love letter from Trump right after that, Mr. Biden said. Sanders and Biden tangle over foreign policy judgment. Mr. Sanders took another opportunity to obliquely swipe at Mr. Biden's vote to authorize the war in Iraq when asked about America's role in the Middle East. What we have to face as a nation is that the two great foreign policy disasters of our lifetimes, with the war in Vietnam and the war in Iraq, both of those wars were based on lies, Mr. Sanders said, adding that he feared President Trump could lead the nation into another war amid tensions between the United States and Iran. Mr. Biden did not take on Mr. Sanders of Iraq, choosing to emphasize another element of his foreign policy record, the nuclear deal with Iran, achieved during the Obama administration. I was part of that deal to get the nuclear agreement with Iran, bringing together the rest of the world, including some of the folks who aren't friendly to us, Mr. Biden said. And it was working. Ms. Klobuchar and Mr. Buttigieg each said they would not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons, though neither of them stipulated what they would do beyond negotiations to stop Iran from doing so. Should combat troops remain in Iraq? Another split in the candidates emerged on foreign policy. Ms. Warren, Mr. Buttigieg and Mr. Sanders said they'd remove combat troops from Iraq, while Ms. Klobuchar and Mr. Biden said they would leave some in place. I would leave some troops there, but not in the level that Donald Trump is taking us right now, Ms. Klobuchar said. Ms. Warren said that it is time to bring the troops home. I think we need to get our combat troops out, she said. You know, we have to stop this mindset that we can do everything with combat troops. Our military is the finest military on earth, and they will take any sacrifice we ask them to take. But we should stop asking our military to solve problems that cannot be solved militarily. And Mr. Buttigieg said, we can continue to remain engaged without having an endless commitment of ground troops. But what's going on right now is the president's actually sending more. Mr. Buttigieg said if he is elected president and asks Congress to authorize military force overseas, he would ask for the legislation to expire after 3 years. When I am president, any time, which I hope will never happen, but any time I am compelled to use force and seek that authorization, we will have a 3-year sunset, so that the American people are included, not only in the decision about whether to send troops, but whether to continue, he said.